So this is kind of interesting. There's a film that I found called Testament, the story of Moses, and I guess it kind of how this one is reminds me of The Chosen, only instead of it just being a full-on story, it's more like a kind of documentary. But yeah, how this has been formed is kind of what I want to do. I want to do a version where I take all the stories of Jesus and then add my interpretation, which can vary because there's lots of different interpretations. You know, for the Jesus story, on one hand, I want to support the Jesus beliefs and the Jesus theory. Why? Because it's a good way of getting people into heaven. So you can do. I'm wondering if there should be like two versions of it. You know how you can take the same story and change the narrative. Jesus made lots of ways. The narrative of Jesus was that believe in Christ and you can go to heaven, and believe that the sacrifice. God sacrificed His Son, so that they can get into. So that the world could get into heaven. You can tell it on many different narratives. My narrative of that is if I was to sacrifice my son, that means that I'm a terrible God. But because I don't actually believe in death, I believe in reincarnation, death doesn't actually mean death. So my interpretation of that is just that you live your life, you're born, you grow, you develop, and then you die. So you're sacrificed, and then you're born again in a different body, a different race, a different sex. Through this, you can learn not to be sexist because you can be male in one life and a female in the other. And if you think it's fine to own women and treat them like property, well, then I really hope that you die soon and become a woman and become a property of someone else's. The last episode, there's only one series, only series number 1 seems to be on Netflix of The Chosen, so I can't watch any more series. But that story about the adulterous woman, it's not a nice story, and it didn't even really go into the full story. It just basically had her being a possession of some guy and her wanting to be with someone else. But apparently the laws were only males were allowed to divorce women. Women couldn't divorce men. So if a woman didn't like the partner and wanted to be with someone else, even if the marriage has been long dead and the woman is a fully grown adult who has complete right to choose who she wants to be with and move on to someone else, if the partner is an asshole who doesn't give a shit about his property, because that's if you see women as property, there's a tendency to just treat them like shit, because you see them as just your property, and you don't want to lose your property. Like houses. If you have loads of houses and you don't want to lose them because that's your property. But yeah, if she goes on to become a adulteress and is tormented by the village because of this, and if the man's a dickhead, that the village would see that as just being her fault. And I think if you have this kind of attitude towards women, then I don't give a shit what happens to you, because I think that's disgusting. And if you want to treat women like this, then if you died and had the same shit happen to you, and people treated you unfairly because you want a divorce and your partner isn't letting you, and the governments are saying that you're not allowed to get a divorce because you're a woman and you're stupid or something like that, you're going to go through a lot of torment, you're going to go through a lot of you're going to go through a lot of suffering, but this suffering would make you want to fight more for your own rights, and stuff. And when I see horrible things happen to people like this, if I know what their beliefs on and views are on women, it just makes me not care, because I'm like, you wouldn't care if this happened to me, so why should I care if you die, become a woman, and have it happen to you? You didn't care about others. So it's like that. And anyway, I'm watching this Moses story now, and I didn't know I can't really remember the story of Moses. The Bible is way too long for me to read the stories of Moses. I know I have gone through some of the stories in my retelling of the Bible, and I've given quite a good accurate description of how wrong he is in his decisions and stuff. But in one of them he sees one of the leaders beating up one of his slaves, and in anger he kills him. I think something like that would happen, because if everyone starts off being born into slavery or into a impoverished family, and then you go through beatings like this, and it enrages you, it brings out anger, and then you die, and then you get born into maybe a different circumstance, and sometimes you can be triggered by certain events. I think that's kind of what happened to Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate wasn't so bad a long time ago, but after making huge amounts of money and having all that stripped away from him, I feel like that's brought out some inner rage or inner memory of something that's happened to him in his past life, and that's made him want to lash out. And he killed one of the higher up people, and then he had to run away because he didn't want to be hurt or something. But I don't know, they're talking about him in this video. But
about Jethro is he is loving, that he provides shelter, that he's a good judge of character. It doesn't matter to him whether this guy is Egyptian or Midianite or whatever he might be. He did something to help, and he's in need.
So in that, they just showed a clip of Moses meeting a woman, and the woman inviting her into the house, and this guy was basically just giving a description. So the woman has brought the woman's brought this guy Moses back that he's met. She met by the will.
So I left for the desert. A man can be free there. Egyptian ways are not like ours. But for your bravery, on my daughter's behalf, you may stay the night.
So he's gone back to this woman's father's house, and the father's invited him to stay in the house. And then it goes on.
Jethro is one of my favorite characters in the entire Moses saga. What we know about Jethro is he is loving, that he provides shelter, that he's a good judge of character. It doesn't matter.
So all of that to me is just
all
of that to me. What he just said is him changing the narrative of the story. It doesn't say that. We don't know that he's loving or caring or a good judge of character. All the Bible says is I don't know exactly. I need to, if I was to make a proper documentary, I would need to go into details about this, but I'm pretty sure all it is he goes to the father, and the father welcomes him in. But yeah, these documentaries are very good at changing the narrative of the story, because they can take the story and then they can just add things that they don't know. They don't know he's loving. Just because he's been invited to stay, that doesn't mean that he loves the guy. It could just mean that he obviously sees that he's been walking through the desert for a long time and has just taken pity on him. It doesn't mean that it's love. It doesn't mean that he's a good sense of character. He might not trust this guy at all, but is just doing the right thing. So to take a part of the story and then change the narrative to say a bunch of stuff that you don't know. I want to do the similar kind of thing with the Jesus character. Only I'm not going to be judging it on rubbish. I'm not going to be analysing the story just to my own narrative. I'm going to be analysing the story according to what people say, and how I understand the story based on the things that people say. And so I'd like to do a kind of version of this. I would touch on the Moses story. I definitely will at some point, but I think it might be best to wait to see what happens with the Muslim community, because the Muslims are not going to like what I say about Moses. I see Moses as a bad guy. I see Moses as someone who didn't have God, someone who didn't know the truth, and I know I need to be respectful to it, because this is not what the Islamic people believe, and I know that they can be quite dangerous. Me saying this might justify a reason for them to want to kill me. Because of that, I'm not too sure what I should do with the story of Moses. But if there's a documentary film that wants to do the same thing with the Jesus story, only do it with the Moses, and tell the Moses story in a sort of theatrical film way, and just make it how how the people who worship Moses believe, and how they see the stories. I understand everything very differently. I do not see that guy as as someone who can tell a good sense of character. Why? Because he's just basically invited a murderer into his home. Okay, that person he was murdering was whipping other people. But yeah, I think murdering them is not is that any better than you see someone beating someone up and you go and murder them? Is that really the solution to the problem? I mean,
Egyptian or Midianite or whatever he might be, he did something to help, and he's in need. Jethro is a priest of the Midianite people. They were a polytheistic people that lived at the same time as ancient Egypt and eventually as ancient Israel.
I don't think we really had monotheists back then. I think pretty much everyone believed that many gods existed. The question is, which one do you worship? So, I mean, the term is monolatry. It's not monotheism where you only believe there's one God. Monolatry means you only worship one God. You acknowledge the existence of others, right? But there's only one that you worship.
I think the thing about that religion is far better for war. You know, if you believe you'll worship one God, then it doesn't matter what you call that God, you see it as all being the same. You're more likely to see it as the same thing. You're either believing a false God with false lies, or you're believing the real one just under a different name. But yeah, if you believe that there is multiple gods and that you're a bad person for worshipping the wrong one, I think that could be used as a way of causing war amongst tribes.
If you take the Bible literally, God makes it absolutely clear that he's the only God that the Israelites should worship. He doesn't necessarily make it absolutely clear that he is the only God.
Let me just confirm that then. I am God, and I am the only God. Now, no matter what God you worship, the God that the Israelites worship, the God that the Christians worship, the God that the Catholics worship, the God that is... whatever God you worship, that doesn't change the fact that I am the only God. The Bible does not make that specific. Why? Because it's supposed to cause trouble amongst the religions. It's supposed to build division between the groups, and partly the reason why is because it's a sort of punishment for not being able to recognize. I think it's a punishment actually for how people treat women. People treated women like they were property, like they were shit. People treated the different races like they were shit. And the more problems or the more suffering that they would go through, the more they would seek the answers and the truth, and wanting to resolve or come up with some sort of conclusion that will work better with each other. But yeah, I don't know if I deliberately made the stories the way that they are, but I know the Spirit has inspired them according to what they wanted.
In the Ten Commandments, he says, "Thou shalt not have any other gods before you." Now, you could interpret that to mean there are other gods and other people worship those gods, but you, my chosen people, must only worship me.
Or there's another way of interpreting it, which is that Moses, or whoever wrote the character of Moses, was just making up rules and wanted people to worship only one God because he had a view, a portrayal of God, and he wanted everyone to think that his portrayal, his view, his telling of God was the right one. So he's made up these fictional laws that get everyone to kind of worship his view, e.g. him, basically. So yeah, to analyze that and say the commandment says this, therefore God must think this, I think that's a conclusion. There's a difference between a law made by Moses and something that God has actually specifically said. You know, this guy looks smart, but he's basically saying that this is a factual statement that God has said, and in reality, no, I'm not saying this. This is not something that I agree with. I am the only God, and it would be nice if you took me serious and worshipped me, but I don't care if you worship the spaghetti monster. I don't care if you worship a different God. I say it depends on what your God teaches. That's more important. Worshipping, you know, if your God thinks that worshipping of it is the only way to save it, to help others, then I think your God is needs to die because it's not teaching the right things. If your God is Jesus, then yeah, your God needs to die because your God is not teaching the right things. And if your God is the God of Moses, well, that kind of backs up war. That kind of backs up, Moses was a murderer. He went to war and stuff. And therefore, if you're worshipping him as if you're idolizing him as a great man of God, then you're idolizing the wrong thing. So, I think it's important for people to see me as God. Why? Because I've not done any of those things, and I worship science and facts and the proof that God can't save you. You have to save yourself through learning how to be smart and learning how to save yourself, and also learning what you want and stuff. I support logic, and if your God is the God of logic, then I don't care what name you give it, as long as it worships logic and stuff like that. But yeah, if your God is one of these ones, then I'm not approving of it.
Bedding is ready. What do you see?
Who lives in the mountain?
No one. Why?
Saw a fire there on the summit.
No, it's impossible. It's holy ground. No one may go there.
Then what did I see there?
I haven't actually watched this next bit, so I don't know how interesting it's going to be, but I just wanted to say that. I'll probably put a stop to now.